So before we get going, we have a couple of housekeeping announcements. So this session will be recorded and uploaded to our channel, Horizons by Hopkins, for those who cannot join us today. And please make sure that your name is showing up correctly so we can call on you easily during the Q&A session. I strongly encourage you all to use the chat box and introduce yourself and get to know one another in addition to asking a question. I know some of you might be having lunch. It's 2 p.m., but feel free to turn on your cameras. And the agenda for today is that we'll go into a moderated discussion with a few questions I have here, and then we'll open the floor up to you all to ask questions to the panelists. Then we'll wrap up by 3 p.m. With that, let's get started. I'll begin by introducing myself. I'm Anju Priyadarshini. I'm a full-time MPH student at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, concentrating on women and reproductive health. I'm a physician from India with a decade of experience working in public and the private sectors in India and the US. I'm currently in Baltimore with my husband and kids, 2 kids. I have a daughter who's 8 years old and my son will be 3 this December. With that, I would like to introduce my panelists for today, starting with Dr. Othman Murphy. She's the Assistant Professor of Neurology at the University of Pennsylvania. She completed her MD PhD program at the Penn and a neuroscience PhD studying astrocyte and oligodendrocyte gap junctions. After finishing her neurology residency at Penn, she pursued a combined postdoctoral and clinical neurology fellowship at Johns Hopkins University. She started her lab at the Penn in 2018 to study the role of glial cells in myelin disorders, and she's also the co-director of the AIDS-SPAN Fellowship in multiple sclerosis and neuroinflammatory disorders. Welcome, Dr. Othman. And our second panelist for today is Dr. Trask, Dr. Bahira Trask. She is the Human Development and Family Studies Professor at the University of Delaware. She has published over 70 peer-reviewed articles and chapters on globalization, culture, family diversity, gender roles, and work-family life. She's also the author and editor of 5 books. Dr. Trask regularly speaks about complex issues facing working families, women in particular, to international organizations like the UN and international conferences worldwide. In August 2012, she gave a TEDx lecture on the global family changes that has been so widely viewed. And before we begin, please allow me to share a debt of gratitude to our panelists for joining us today. I have no doubt it'll be an invigorating discussion. And also to all who played such a pivotal role in organizing this year's Horizons by Hopkins conference. With that, I would like to invite Dr. Othman and Dr. Trask to share a little bit more about your background. And why does this topic resonate with you as an expert? What has your journey been to parenthood? What stage of your career did you become a parent? We'll start with Dr. Othman.
Great. Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today, especially talking to my friends at Hopkins, which I loved my time there, and of course overlapped with my journey, so including with parenthood. So as you heard, I've been training forever to become an assistant professor so that I can have a translational lab and see patients. And over that time, I had 3 kids, one with each step of training. So I have a PhD baby who's now 15. I have a residency baby who's now 10. And I have the fellowship, my Hopkins baby, who's now 5. And so they were very much a part of every step of this process. And I have no choice but to include it in my talk. Everyone who I work with knows that I have kids. I think it's important to me to be very upfront and with expectations for me and for everyone who works with me to know that family is part of life. And I'll say overall, as just sort of an introduction, that I have no idea what balance means with work and life. It's just sort of a daily puzzle that you have to strategize and be creative and flexible. And so I'm happy to talk about it because, my own experience was different for all 3 kids for every stage of my career. And I think everyone solved these problems differently. But I think when you ask questions and realize that other people have gone through or are going through very similar questions, it helps realize that, you know, you might not always come up with an answer or solution, but that you can commiserate even sometimes.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Trask.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. This is a very interesting topic, and I'm not even sure where to begin. I'm realizing as I'm even just looking at your faces and thinking back, I'm a lot older than everybody on this call. I'm of a whole different generation. And when I was going through graduate school and getting my PhD, you weren't supposed to have kids. You weren't supposed to have kids in graduate school, and you were not supposed to have kids when you were going through the assistant professor phase of your journey. And in fact, when I was on the job market, I'll never forget this. I wasn't planning at the time to have children. I mean, I didn't have a partner. It was just not in my life plan right at that moment. And I went to a job interview, one that I was really, really interested in. And the chair of the department, a man, said to me, "Bahira, I just want you to be aware, everyone in this department is single and no one has children." And I remember leaving going, ooh, I don't want to consign myself to a future where I'm going to be judged on my personal life. That would be inconceivable today, that happened. So because of all of this, I didn't have my children until I was in my 40s. And that has its pluses and its minuses that I can go into. And I only wanted one child. I always imagined I'd put it in a little snuggly and put it in my office in a bouncy chair. And to my great surprise, I had twins, and that changed everything. And my twins are now 16 years old. And in fact, on Tuesday night, I had to give a quote unquote big talk, one of those talks where you're invited and it's, everybody from your university comes, high pressure talk. My kids were like, "Mom, we want to come too." And I took them, and it was really interesting because everybody around me said, "You brought your kids to this talk?" And I said, "They love listening to me talk." And one of my kids even asked a question, which she was very polite. She asked a great question, but I could tell that some of the older people in the audience were not pleased at all by any of this, that I had done this. And yet I think it's role modeling that, supposedly I'm in the family field, so of all things, so I should be able to bring my very well-behaved kids to a talk. And just to answer Jennifer, because I work in this area, there is no such thing as work-family balance. I don't even like that term. I call it work-family or work-life negotiation, because that's what you do on a daily basis. And I can comment more on that later. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so insightful. And I agree, we have come a long way considering the generation, but we still have a very long way to go. Yes. And you both are so accomplished in your line of work, and you must get this often, like how much you're admired and how successful you've been in your academic career while raising children. But my question for you today is, what is it that we don't see? What have your challenges been? It's easy to say, "Oh, we admire you." So what resources did you use? Like what programs? Be it local, federal, or state, what worked?
Should I start?
Why don't you go first? We have different perspectives, which is very interesting, I think, for the audience, because we had our children at different points in our career. So
right. Okay. I wrote out the answers to your questions because I was thinking, and it ended up being different for each kid. So, but I would say overall, having your first kid is the biggest hurdle, right? Because you're totally changing your life. And I had my first child as a graduate student, and actually had him a few months after I defended my thesis. And I wasn't able to get full-time daycare. I wasn't getting off of any wait list at a daycare, and my mother-in-law could only watch him 3 days a week. So I ended up negotiating to work as a postdoc for a year in my thesis lab and not going back to the rest of med school for a year. And everyone at the time was extremely worried that I was doing something crazy. But it turns out that I was able to do all of the experiments I knew very well how to do, and do a new project, get a paper out of it, and only work 40 hours a week was the stipulation, which was like 3 days of full-time and a little bit extra. And then and be at home with my baby for a lot of the time. And it turned out to be awesome. And afterwards, everyone was like, wow, are you okay? You did this? I'm like, this was, I think, my favorite year of training. So yes. And so, you know, in that you can see that the biggest challenge is finding daycare, someone to take care of your child so that you have the mental freedom to feel safe and that they're cared for so that you can do your training and your job. And I think that is the biggest challenge. Once we got into the daycare, it was a wonderful community that helped raise my children, right? With the families and the teachers and everyone there. They learned how to be good people as part of this. And so for me, it was worth it in so many different ways. When I went to Hopkins, we used the Bright Horizons that's on the medical campus there, which was amazing for the hours, frankly, for what I had to do. So that was a new thing, but also it was another community of wonderful people. The teachers that I'm still friends with on Facebook because they became part of my family. And, you know, I didn't potty train my children. They learned how to potty train at daycare. Like there are things that I learned to not even attempt to let the experts do. And I got to take advantage of. And so I think that some of the themes that I've realized was that if I can find the people that love and take care of my children that are part of my village, then it'll work. As you grow up and then go to elementary school, then you find the other parents. They can be your friends. They can be the ones who pick up your kids when you forget that it's half day. This happens to me all the time because it's really hard to keep up with all of these things. And so and so you need again this like extended village to help you do what you can do.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. You need to have the village, especially since, like for me, I'm an immigrant and coming here and not having my family, I need to depend on someone else to be there for me. And yeah, that's almost all the time, friends and take care who become an extended family. Mm-hmm. Dr. Trask?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say is I work in the family field, and there's a lot of research, obviously, on the transition to parenthood. That's a very studied phenomenon. And so from the academic perspective and from the personal perspective, I don't think there's any transition, honestly, that is more impactful than having your first child. Nothing can prepare you for it. I stand in front of a large class of 350 people. I teach about it year after year. And when it happened to me, it was an absolute shock to my system. Yeah. And pregnancy didn't prepare me for it. Nothing. Like I said, all my academic, nothing. In fact, it was so hard not to scare everybody because I'm delighted that I have children. And I feel it's actually the best thing that has happened to me. Despite loving my career, I actually love my children more. But 3 months into it, I was tired in a way that I had never experienced before because I also had twins, and all the parenting books are written for, you know, when the baby sleeps, you sleep. But when you have twins, one's always awake, always screaming. Yeah, they're unbelievably loud. And I was so tired that I lay on the floor and I cried. And I said to my husband, I can't do this. There is no way I can do 2 babies and my career. I don't know what we're going to do, but this isn't it. You know, and I'm not that kind of a person at all. So for me to hit rock bottom like that, that was pretty dramatic. Like Anju, I'm also an immigrant. And my parents did not live here. I did not have an extended family to help. I was missing those social supports, which I've seen when people have them really make a big difference, even psychologically, because like I said, I got so depressed. I didn't see how I was going to be able to handle it. But of course, you end up pulling yourself together. And, you know, I ended up hiring people to help me. At first, I tried the daycare route, but it turned out because I had 2 babies, it was so expensive to put them into daycare that it was actually cheaper for me to hire someone. And I got lucky. I found a very nice older woman who had 3 children. And so she taught me I didn't know what to do. It doesn't, there's this sort of, my husband and I, who we got along well, but we started arguing because he was like, you should know what to do. I said, how would I know what to do? I'm not around babies. How? I don't know, and we would get into these contentious things with each other, even though we were both thrilled to have the babies. Somehow I was to intrinsically know how to quote unquote mother these two babies. This lady actually taught me. She taught me about nutrition. She taught me easier ways to diaper them and all of that. But those first 2 years were very, very difficult. So, and I don't want to scare anybody away. I feel like we're being very negative. There's a lot of pluses to having children, even very young children. I have loved watching the development of my children. Each phase, everybody says to me, oh, don't you miss this? I liked each phase and I'm very proud of them. And it's fascinating to see your interaction with them and how they see the world and everything else. So.
I totally agree. And parenting, as they say, it cannot be learned by reading a book. And especially for someone who has lived through it, just like Dr. Trask said, it's hard. And only when you go through it, you realize how hard it is. But at the same time, it's the most enriching and most meaningful thing you would have ever done in your life. So yeah, not scaring anyone here, just giving the perspective from both sides.
I want to add something also. It also depends on the temperament of the baby. You might want to comment on that, because we had two at the same time. And one was very easy. And we used to say, if we just had that one, we would have said, what's everybody making such a fuss about? It's delightful having a baby. Yeah. The second baby was colicky and cried. He could cry for like 2 hours at a time and nothing would stop him. And we thought we were going crazy. And we used to say, if we'd only had that one, we would have said never again. So there are a lot of variables that come into the equation.
Oh yes, with my first child, listened to everything, went along with all of my strategies for like timeouts and stuff. I was like, this parenting thing is easy. I'm really good at this. And then I had my second kid, and I was wrong.
Yeah,
totally different personality. I had to come up with new strategies.
I feel it's always the second kid. Just I was telling my husband, like, if we had this one first, I would not have gone on to, yeah. Our first one. Let me just get in. Eugene is here, so. Okay, did I admit it? Okay, let me welcome our third panelist for today. Hi, Eugene. So he's a senior technical specialist, a trainer, ICF International president, ICF International, a president of Fathers Forward. He's this author of I Never Met My Father. And Eugene is an award-winning and a sought-after speaker and a trainer. So he's an expert at providing training in the fields of fatherhood and youth violence prevention. He provided strategic advice to the White House office after being appointed by President Barack Obama as the director of faith-based partnerships for the United States Department of Justice. He has received numerous awards, appeared on ABC, CBS, and he's been quoted on Washington Post, Boston Globe, and Huffington Post. Welcome, Eugene. Can you?
Hey everybody, can you guys hear me? Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on with you guys. I heard the comments about children. So I have 4, and I always say the first one was the hardest. My son, who's going to college soon, oh my God, I'm so old, didn't sleep through the night for the first 9 months. Oh my God, it was so hard, so difficult. That was the worst part of my second book that I write is going to be called Sleep When the Baby Sleeps. Because that sleep deprivation is no joke. But then my daughter came 2 years later and she slept through the night at 9 weeks, she's an angel, of course, And then we had our third child and I don't remember because it was all a blur. And then now we have 4 and it's just happening to us. So I'm very grateful to be here with you all. I'm all ears. My wife and I are celebrating 20 years of marriage next summer, and balancing being a dad and a husband and working has been a great challenge. I don't think anybody has mastered it, but it certainly is a good goal to work towards. I'll just share this one quick story, and I know I'm jumping in late and I apologize. Thanks for fitting me in. But I travel to Boston once a month. And so I generally try and follow this model. If I can, I try and do quick trips. So I like to leave early in the morning, stay overnight if I have to, and then come back the very next day. And I like to be able to say to my wife and my children, I'll see you tomorrow. And in my mind, that's good. I'll see you tomorrow. Like, that's so quick, they won't even miss me, right? So I did that last month. I left on a Monday, came back on a Tuesday. But then I had another trip that I left on a Thursday and came back on Friday. So I was only really there for like one full day. And so I'm like getting ready to head to the airport. And I say, all right, I'll see you tomorrow, my catchphrase. And my 12-year-old says, what? You're leaving again? And he just was so sincere. He said, no. He's only 12. No. This isn't working. He says, I need my dad. And he said, you mean to tell me and he's 12, if you travel an average of 3 days a month, that's 36 days a year. That's 10% of the year I'm missing my dad. And it just touched me so in such a, I said, I need to do something different. Because these years, I have 2 teenagers and a preteen and a 5-year-old. I said, I'm not going to get these years back. And years ago, I heard this quote, and I try and live by it, but sometimes it's easier said than done. I'd rather fail at work than fail at home, right? Like, if I'm successful at work and I have all these, awards and recognition and affirmation, promotion, that's great. And everybody loves that, especially us men. We love to be patted on the back and tell how great we are. But if I succeed at work, but then I'm failing at home, that to me is like the great tragedy, right? But if I can succeed at home and, I'll get another job, right? To be honest, but I'm not going to get another family. And so I think particularly, those of us who are ambitious and driven and, sometimes we can make the mistake of falling for the trap that, work we get an immediate reward, right? Like if we do great, we get a certificate, we get a plaque, we get a gold watch, we get promoted. And then we go home and we think like, people have been telling me all day how great I am. And we go home and we're getting ignored by our kids. Our wife is busy or our spouse is tired, right? We don't get that same level of affirmation. So we go where we're affirmed. So I think we just have to be really intentional to remember, put in the first things first. So I just want to get that out before we continue, but thank you guys.
Thank you for that insight, because it's great to have you here today, because we often get the woman's perspective on balancing work and family all the time, but it's a man's perspective. So having you have started on that, so I'll just go ahead with the next question to you, Eugene. So you do talk to a lot of dads, you coach a lot of dads, and with COVID and many things being virtual these days, parents have to share a lot more responsibilities with childcare than before. So what do the dads tell you? How do they perceive this? What do they struggle with, or what are they not telling us moms?
I can't let you all in on the secrets. No, that's the man code. No. I think one of the things I'm really happy about is that I think a lot of norms are shifting, particularly when it comes to men being viewed as capable and competent caregivers for children, right? I think I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and figures like Homer Simpson or Al Bundy from Married with Children, they were, or what's that other show? There's just a plethora of them where dads are looked at as like either imbeciles or dunces or just, a number of kind of stereotypical figures. But the dads that I talk to nowadays, they are changing diapers. They're stay-at-home dads oftentimes. They are nurturers. We're hugging our kids. We're kissing our kids. We're not afraid to demonstrate emotion and affection, right? We are supporting our spouses, right? Career aspirations and those types of things. And we struggle as well. And I think the men that I'm privileged to connect with, the fathers, we realize that we need support. We need encouragement. We need to share when we miss it. with one another. We need to be open and honest about what we're going through. There's such a, unfortunately, a lot of young boys are socialized to when we were boys, that boys don't cry, right? We're supposed to act like a man, and that's just the farthest thing from the truth, right? We're human beings and we have emotions, and so as dads, we talk about the full range of emotions that we experience. If something makes us afraid, that doesn't make us somehow less masculine or manly or strong or powerful. It's actually stronger to be able to acknowledge it. So when I miss it with my wife or my kids, or I overreact, or I say something, that I shouldn't have said, fortunately I have a group of fathers around me that I can disclose that to, but also that will encourage me and let me know I'm not the only one, right? There was a time when, I'll tell you this quick story. My teenage son, I don't know if you guys have teenagers, but teenagers makes life very exciting and interesting. There's never a dull moment. That's a euphemism, right? But I overreacted with my son, that same 17-year-old that didn't sleep through the bed till he was 9 months old. And all it took was some body language. He didn't even say anything. And it just kind of like rubbed me the wrong way, right? He was kind of feeling himself. And I overreacted. And then I felt really bad at my overreaction. So I called my father-in-law, who's the best father in the world. And he said, son, I've done the same exact thing. He raised 5 sons, right? And 2 daughters. And so just to know that, I wasn't the only one that made a terrible mess of things, just was really good to know. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, definitely. It was such a wonderful insight into how dads feel. And you always need that village. And for each person, it differs. Like, what is your village? Like for dads, you need to have someone who talks your same language, I guess, is one way of putting it. But thank you, Eugene, for that. And for my next question is, we were talking about how we as women, we have to choose something, for the lack of better words, of family-friendly careers. So we hear this a lot, like, I want to go into this XYZ industry because it's easier, career integrating work and family. Like, for example, last week I was advised to apply for domestic internships and not international ones because I have a family and it gives me greater flexibility. So have you experienced this in your life? And did you have to choose one path or another? And what advice do you have? We'll start with Dr. Trask and then go to Dr. Ortman and then Eugene.
Well, like I said, I'm of a different generation. And so I see, and I'm also now the chair of my department. So I have a lot of young people. Most of my colleagues are quite junior, and we're talking 30, 35 years younger than I am at this point. So I have a somewhat different perspective, but I will tell you that when I was in that phase, post-college, pre-graduate school, and I was debating at the time, do I go into law or do I go into academia? I had been a political science major, and I had thought about going into the Foreign Service or doing international law. And then I actually became friends with several women who had been in law and who had had a child and who had had to drop out of their careers. And I saw that at the time, and I didn't want that. I always wanted to have the option to go in one direction or the next. But that said, the world has improved a great deal since when it's not perfect yet. But for example, in the academic world, there's a lot of flexibility now for young people who have children. I see that in our work. You get a semester off at full pay, and there's all kinds, and it doesn't matter if you're male or female. There's those kinds of accommodations that really didn't exist when I was going through it.
Thank you for that, Dr. Ortman. We can't hear you.
Did it work now? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry about that. So yeah, definitely. Every stage of the career, when I said I was interested in going to medical school and doing an MD, PhD, and you want to do neurology and all that sort of stuff, like you want to do that as a woman and you want to have a family, because like I said before, I just, it was always going to be a part of what I did, and I have never made that a secret. And so I mean, I figured out at some point, and I don't know when, that you have to, like, people will give you advice whether you ask for it or not, and you have to pick which one you'll listen to. So I found that out the earliest when I was told by my counselor not to apply for an MD PhD program, and you can see I'm glad I didn't listen to that, because that's what I ended up doing just fine. And so what I sort of how I approached that was that I then found the people that seemed to have aspects of what I wanted to do. So I don't think it's a coincidence that my thesis mentor had 4 kids. He was a man, but he had 4 kids, and they played an important role in his life. And he went home every day at 5:30, no matter what, because he was expected home for dinner. And so while his wife, did a lot more of the work, it was the same. And my postdoc mentor also has 3 kids, and I've always sought out asking other people, how they did that. I get asked during interviews a lot how I've done this over time. So I think that times have changed, that people are asking the questions of how you do this. And, I don't always know how to answer that question. I think it's definitely something to overcome, but I think that there are now a population of people that are doing this, that are also not just women, that are doing this and making it a clear part of their life. My husband, who I've not given enough credit to for all of his dad things that I should, or he'll be upset that I didn't give him credit for all that he does in much of the shared responsibilities. I've asked him, actually, when he's interviewing different people, he works in IT, so he doesn't, it's more of a male dominated field overall. Like, do you ask people, or do people ask about family support and daycare and that when they're interviewing? And it's not a topic of conversation. I was like, well, you should probably just mention, that your kid's at the daycare at the place, just so they know, like, that it's probably part of their responsibility too, at this point. So I think that if it's approached in this sort of less biased way, then it becomes everybody's job, an expectation.
That is a wonderful take. That is so true. When the other person has kids and they have perspective on this, then it makes it so much more easier. Eugene, would you like to?
Right, thank you. All right, I think I got it. No, I think I love the 2 responses for the folks that went before me. I just think it's just really important to be very intentional about prioritizing family in all that you do, and unashamedly. And Dr. Murphy, I just wondered in your response about, like, I would never ask someone else interviewing about, like, their maternal status, their parent status, stuff like that, just because I think that's not unrelated to the role, right, and responsibility. But once we bring on someone, certainly I think anyone that I've ever supervised or mentored, or always encourage them to really prioritize putting family first. So that's just my motto.
I just wanted to follow up. I totally agree. I realize I said that, and I should have corrected myself to say not meant to ask while during the interview, but never as a participant. But actually, so you're totally right. Thank you for pointing that out. But I had mentioned to him to mention his own experience, because I actually mentioned my own experience, so that the person in front of you never has to feel the pressure to do that, but rather to share that all of these things are available. So I completely agree. You can ask. I will add a little story to that, though. So because rightly so, you're not supposed to ask the trainee or the person who's interviewing for any position. When I was applying for residency, I wanted to talk about having a kid, and not share that I planned on having more, in particular during residency, but that they needed to know that I was a mom and wasn't going to pretend I wasn't a mom when I was there. So I ended up putting my son under hobbies on the application, because it's a very restricted way, but I wanted it to be there. And so that people could say, like, oh, it's unusual. People don't usually put this under hobbies. Like, well, let me tell you about my, now 2-year-old and this, and, because I needed to actually, from my own perspective, feel out where it was going to be okay, that this is, like, it's not changing just because I appear at your program. But, and so, it's very difficult, from this side of the perspective, to remember that I'm not a peer, right? that I want it to be an open and expected discussion that people during this time of life that you're going to have a family and kids if you want them, right?
Yeah.
And so to be an expectation, but you're right. Definitely do not ask and expect people. I think sort of like Bahira had that experience of being told something about that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say something real quick about the fact that we're even able to do this over Zoom. I don't know if you guys remember, but years ago there was like a weatherman or something, and he went viral because his child like came on screen while he was doing the weather, right? And it was like, oh my God, his child came on screen while he was doing the weather, right? That was 3 years ago. But now, like, how many times does your child come on camera while you're in a meeting because they need something, right? Particularly during the height of the pandemic. I think that's one of the unintended benefits of the pandemic, which is we realize we are humans. We do have children. We do have spouses that need things, and we're also employees and contributors and so forth. So I like it when I see, my colleagues' kids come on screen, and if my 5-year-old wants to climb on my shoulders during a meeting, I used to like hush him out the room, but nowadays it's like it's more normalized. So I just want to throw that out there.
I totally agree. Now in the master's class, I have 2 kids, right? And most of the live talks are in the evening, like 5:30 to 8:30. It's inevitable that my kids will somehow be in. So all my professors now know my kids by their names. So it's wonderful. It's one of those positives of COVID, I guess. We are running a little bit over time. So let me ask this question, which I really wanted to. Now we are on the topic of careers and how you were hired. So my next question is a practical one. All of us are starting internships and applying for jobs here at the school. So what are some of the red flags or positives to look for in an organization as parents when we are applying for jobs? What question should we ask the employer before accepting jobs to ensure that parenthood and career balance? What do you have to say? Let's start with Dr. Trask again, and then go to Dr. Atman and Eugene.
It's a great question. I tell my graduate students always, when you're being interviewed, you interview them also. It's a two-way street because you want to make sure that you're in a supportive environment where your career will thrive and where you will also have, good mental health and everything else. So what I do is I don't ask them about their personal life, but I will tell them about the various programs we have at the university, what childcare is available. Also, they get, like I said, they get a semester parental leave, but they can also take another semester research leave. So a lot of our young people, they're taking a full year off when they have a baby at full pay without any responsibility. So like committees and teaching and things like that. So that's a big plus. So I tell them to look for these kind of formal policies that are in place so that they have recourse should they end up with a supervisor who is not particularly friendly for whatever reason. They have larger, systems in place that protect them. So I think that's very important to look for.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Rothman? Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's sort of like I said before, like when I'm interviewing someone, I try to provide all of those personal details of like what my kids had been in the daycare and even if I know what other people are doing, or like, if you have any questions, this is definitely feel free to ask me about these sorts of things. And I think from the perspective of like applying for jobs is to, especially if you've been offered the job already, to ask people and speak to them directly about how, when are meeting times and are there flexibility when you have to like be going home and picking up your kids from daycare, and how are these things approached? One of the things in our department is we actually have most of our meetings during the day so that they don't overlap with like early morning drop off and pickup, because there's so many of us that have daycare and child issues that it's just like everybody would be missing it. So what's the point? But we have an open discussion. And so, being able to ask for the people and when things are happening and what the flexibility is and how people have solved the problems there already, and you get very forward responses, means that, this is a place where it's welcomed and discussed and out in the open.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Eugene.
Yeah, I think to I think the point that was made earlier about you're interviewing, not only are you interviewing, but you're interviewing the person who's interviewing you, right? And understanding that you have tremendous power. Someone used to tell me, when you interview, understand that the organization that you're interviewing, they're going to benefit more by you being there than not you necessarily being there. And so hold yourself in high esteem in the sense of, and be selective. You don't have to take the first thing that's offered to you, and you do want to be clear before you go into a place. And same thing once you actually get the internship or you get the job, is just understand your own power, your own voice, and being clear about what your own needs are. And the earlier you do that, the better. When you set a precedent, like I need to leave at this time to get home, right? Like, just be clear. There's been times in my career when I was younger where I was less bold about that, right? And less clear. And when you let people kind of make you work long hours or whatever, and you don't say anything, they're going to assume that that's okay. But if you're just very clear, like, this is my situation, I need this, this is what I need, they can either accommodate it or not, but ask, right? And just be clear. So like questions like asking the interviewer, how do you balance work life? What's your approach? And that'll be telling, right? If they say, we're all here, we work 60 hours a week. Well, that's telling, right? I was on a plane with a person who talked about, she has a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old at home, and she travels like 4 days a week. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's amazing that you do that. I said, you need to let your people know that that's not going to work for you anymore. I know, I need to do it. Yes, you need to do that. You need to be very clear about what you need. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Yes, basically set your expectations, make it clear. That's a wonderful tips. And we are definitely running a little over time. We have 5 more minutes left in the session. So I'll let me move on to the next segment and see if I have any questions in the Q&A, the chat section. So Riley wants to know, can you talk about how parenthood was modeled for you? That is, did you have a stay-at-home parent, or how this shaped your expectations of yourself when you became a parent? How can you set these expectations aside when you're building your own family and career at the same time, if that was not modeled for you? Can any one of you take that?
So I guess I can start it if you can hear me. Okay. So when I was young, my mom was stay at home, but she went to school and became a school nurse. And so I think by the time I was in middle school, she had a job, and I thought that was so cool. So I think that and my dad was a lawyer, so like between the two of them working, and I got to take on more responsibility. I modeled that thinking that I could see how happy it made her to be doing that instead, that was something I wanted to do, but also to know that we would be fine at home. So I sort of never had the expectation that there wouldn't be like potentially 2 people working in our household with our kids, although to be honest, having someone who stays at home is also a wonderful thing. And I've seen that change with both my friends and different families over time. So I think both possibilities can work out just fine.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else want to add on to that?
I'd like to add something in general that I've learned over my career. There are times when you're really going to have to invest yourself, either in your career or in your family life. A child is sick, something happens, but there are other times also where you have a make or break it project that, or something you're trying to work on and finish. I wrote a book when my children were very young, and it was very important for my career. I involved the kids in it. They knew about it. And actually my daughter she was like 4 or 5. She ended up trying to write a book also. She was really interested in the whole process. But I'm just trying to say, I said at the beginning, there's no such thing as balance. It's a negotiation, and it's a lifetime negotiation. So there are times you have to go for it, because that is the thing that's going to take you to the next piece, which is then also good for everybody involved. So I don't think, just being steady state, low key really works if you're trying to build a real career. I want to be realistic about it. So.
No, that's good. That's good. I jumped on late, so I didn't hear about that. It's not a balance, it's a negotiation. I really, really like that. For me, my mom, I was raised by a single mom. My mom was an educator, and just seeing her go out the house every single day to schools in a thankless position and underpaid really modeled for me, the value of hard work and investing yourself in the lives of young people. And so that's what my career is primarily centered around. Even though I didn't have my dad in my life, I was fortunate that I had other role models that modeled father figures that came into my life later on, most notably my wife's dad, who became my dad and just was such an excellent example. He had 7 children. They adopted a child, fostered over 50 children over the years. When I first started dating my wife, they had 13 children literally in their house, plus me, because they kind of adopted me. So I was fortunate. I had great examples. My wife has both worked outside the home and also in the home. And so I've been just really fortunate as well. So that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for those insights. And it's 3 p.m. It's been such a wonderful discussion. I would like to wrap up. It's time to wrap up. I would like to thank our fantastic panelists, Dr. Orthman, Dr. Trask, Eugene, for taking your time out of your busy schedules to join us today. And I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to moderate the session, and the audience for being here and engaging with the panelists. And please reach out to panelists or me if you have any follow-up questions. Yes, and also follow us, the Hopkins by Horizons, on our social media to know about any of our future events. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.